So what I'm going to talk about is actually, like Peter mentioned, is all the talks we heard today. They talked about a lot of modeling, and actually work I have been doing is primarily, I'm a sort of modeler, but I try to call myself a reformed modeler because I used to do a lot of modeling, and I thought that it's really good idea to look at some of the fundamental processes, how they work in this type of complex systems. So I think I have a long association with Mike Shih. Actually, I have spent quite a bit of time in Denmark. I spent my sabbatical there. Then I have been, a number of my students actually worked at DHI. So this is actually, I did this study in 2001. Actually, we were looking at the issue of verification of Mike Shih. So the idea was that, when you take Mike Shih as an integrated model, when you try to integrate different components of the model to see whether this coupling maintains its accuracy. So this is a study I did actually. If you go to, it used to be Mike Shih site, you could see this. Actually, in this particular case, I need to learn how to use this one. Okay, good. So actually, this is an application. This is a fairly complicated application dealing with Rocky Flats nuclear plant, which was closed, and there was a major plutonium problem. So my Robert Pruka, some of you probably know him. He was my PhD student. Actually, started with me like mid-90s, and then he finished in about 2002. And then so we actually conducted this study to basically show Department of Energy that this particular model is applicable for this type of size. So we had to go through a lot of, if I remember correct, I gave a whole set of test problems, and the Mike Shih was put through these test problems, and then we showed that some they had some trouble and some of them were fixed. Hopefully, so this is the type of work I have been doing. Since then, we have used Mike Shih in many applications. Robert, Bob, and I work quite closely on some of these problems. So the general idea in all my presentation, which I'm going to talk about today, is primarily based on this. I gave a Darcy medal talk in 2012. So the idea here is that actually I was trying to make the argument that if you do really good experiments, I call them theory-driven experiments, and the various test scales, then you can still help to fill number of knowledge gaps in the understanding of some of the processes which are important in emerging problems. So I'm going to talk about a few of these problems as we go. So my research, what I promote is this idea of not really being a modeler here. So I always try to train my students, and in my talks, I try to make this point that I think it's important that we try to iterate between these three. And you need to be able to go to the lab, and you need to do some fundamental work in the lab at different scales. And then obviously you don't want to stay here all your life. And also I believe that as researchers, we should not stay in all of our life here. So what we like to do is to be able to iterate, and once you learn from that, you should be able to come back and then improve your model. So this is generally the idea of the type of research I do. So I think I sort of changed this presentation last night a little bit, mainly for the reason that I was listening to a lot of FEFLOW talks. I thought it's a good idea for me to share some of the work I do in a new area of integrated modeling when you look at the land-atmospheric interaction, because there are many interesting problems in this area. So I want to talk about that problem a little bit, and then my main topic of my presentation is this FEFLOW integration and experimental setup. Actually, I don't know very many experiments like this, and I want to introduce some interesting ideas about using sensor-based real-time data, and this is sort of create a new paradigm in the way we use models, because data comes so fast, and you need to make sure that the model responds to this data. So we'll talk about that. So I'm going to talk about the proof of concept. This is an experiment we did in a smaller scale, and I was just starting on an intermediate scale, which are this larger scale, and we go from there. Okay, so this is the slide I want to spend a little bit of time to talk about some of the newer problems and challenging problems. So I have been making the argument, actually some of you know this maybe better than I do, that most of the interesting problems in hydrology are at the interfaces. So if you look at very simple problems, this problem of trapping of chemicals in soils is of important in remediation, but this is getting to be quite important now in application dealing with carbon sequestration. When you inject CO2 into the geologic formation, the trapping mechanism, how this mass transfer. So this happens at the pore scale. So then we go to another interesting interface is unsaturated flow, where you have, some of you know that quite well, these are two-phase systems. So as you move up the scale, you see this is a, even though people have not thought about this, but this is an interesting interface problem. How do you couple the unsaturated zone to the saturated zone? The water table going up and down. Actually, my sheet type of models do these things. Also, without realizing, you are looking at river aquifer interaction problems or interface problems. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what are the complexities of this type of problems moving across interface. And another interface problem is this problem of snow atmospheric interaction problem. And then land atmosphere. This is the one I'm going to talk about a little more today. And then, of course, the land-ocean interaction problem. This is some work I did on the tsunami in Sri Lanka, where we had to face this problem of coupling land models to ocean models. So, okay, so the problem of land atmospheric interface, there are many, many interesting problems. Some of these problems who are listed here are the work problem I have been working with my students. So land atmospheric look at the problem of evaporation in climate models, and I'm going to talk a little bit about more of that. And vapor intrusion, these are very interesting problem which has to do with waste sites. And when you are trying to close waste sites, the problem is that you may still have the vapor in the subsurface and get sucked into buildings. And the landmine detection, this is an interesting problem, fairly serious problem around the world. How do I, when you put landmines below the ground surface, how to detect them? This has to do with some of the processes which are happening in the land atmosphere interface. I mentioned this, CO2 leakage, when you put CO2 in subsurface systems, how these things move to the surface, and this gas migration. And then this is a problem we are working on in relation to the unconventional gas development, methane, which Craig talked about yesterday. So we are interested in what is the effect of leaking methane because of the energy transition going from fossil fuels to hydraulic fracturing. And the frozen soil, this is a very interesting problem also. This had a lot to do with the issue of climate change also, because when the permafrost, when the growing season changes, it's going to put more carbon into the atmosphere. This has a major effect on the climate change and the soil deposition. So these are all interesting problems which are happening in this zone here. So this is the zone which is of interest to us. So the idea here is that if you look at any fundamental process of porous media, it happens at the pore scales. And we talked about the heterogeneity issue. So the heterogeneity, as you know, is scale dependent, depends on the observation scale. So you have this type of heterogeneities. And then we have variability and the macropores. And on top of that, if you look at the land atmospheric coupling processes, then you have to worry about the surface, which has surface roughnesses, vegetation, etc. The question is that once these fundamental processes are understood here, when we go into the climate models, how good are we bringing this physics into the climate model? So this is a good example of need for integration and decomposition. So if you understand the process here, you parameterize these processes as you go up, how these things get scaled into the larger system. So I like to make the argument that you will never be able to couple models at this scale. You have to have some sort of integration, but the whole idea behind this integration is how do you intelligently integrate these systems so you still maintain the physics, and the physics is carried as to a scales which are important as much as possible. I'm worried about this arrow moving away from me. So why this is important is I don't want to spend a lot of time on this particular slide, but the general idea is that we are looking at two systems. This is the atmospheric system, and this is the subsurface system. And without getting into a lot of mathematics, we are going to look at how these fluxes are going to go across this interface. So why these problems are complicated is that so both are inherently time dependent. So they are looking at transient problems, and then different fluid flow characteristics. This is more Darcyan flow, small flow, and you can have fairly large flows here. So basically, Stokes equation governs the flow here, and then you can have Darcy's equation. This develop what are called Darcy, Stokes-Darcy models. Then the this is a very complicated thing. The physical processes are sufficiently different. You can see that is like I mentioned, they move very slowly. And also, if you look at the if you model these things system, then the modeling is I'm going to not worry about this. So if you model these systems, so if you model the subsurface first, and then you model the atmospheric system, then what's going to happen is that the dynamics are quite different, and then you take a lot of computer time if you don't couple these processes well. So if you look at the fully coupled model, so if you look at the equations, when you look at the equations at the I still like to use the equation at the smaller scale. So these are the processes. You look at this heat and mass transfer happening at this phase. This is a fairly complex process because when the soil dries, there will be evaporation and there are the latent heat issues. Some of the issues talked about yesterday. And then you are going to see that here the atmospheric processes are going to take over. So if you try to solve these equations as a coupled system, it is fairly complicated. We have tried that. We have published some papers on Darcy Stokes model. But the problem is that when you go to larger and larger scales, you have to decompose these things. You have to divide this into these boxes. Actually, Mike Shee does some of these. You can solve the Richards equation and use the saturated model, and you assume these fluxes, then try to make sure they are compatible. So, but this problem is much more complicated because of the reasons I mentioned here. So the hypothesis we are working on is that this degree of coupling, the strength of the coupling, is scale dependent. In other words, a process which is coupled very closely at a smaller scale doesn't have to necessarily be coupled at a larger scale, but the only problem is you need to determine which are the processes which are more dominant at larger scale. So the idea behind this is that how do I determine when to do the decoupling so I can still maintain the compatibility conditions and the interface as well as the continuity of these flux terms. So that's the general idea. Again, I'm not going to get into details today, but so the approach we have been using in a lot of our research is what you call multi-scale testing and multi-scale modeling. So traditionally, all of you know what multi-scale modeling is, that you start modeling at different scales. But this is an example I'm showing for a case of carbon sequestration. You could see that when you go from this scale, most of the time in experiments, we do one-dimensional models and we move to multi-dimensional fields. So the problem is that when you study a problem in one dimension, when you go to the field, it's going to be 3D. So how do I upscale this information from this scale to that scale? So there are two things which contribute to the complexity of this problem. One is the heterogeneity. Most of the time field is heterogeneous. Most of the tests you are done in a homogeneous system. So a lot of work we do in our lab, we call what we call intermediate scale, which is like a meter to 10 meter scale, where we can actually control these processes. We look at synthetic aquifers, and that's the type of work we are doing, and I'm going to present that in the context of FEFLOW today also. So these are some of the labs we have. They are fairly unique labs, and the primary argument is that when you do field work, it's almost impossible to control initial condition, boundary conditions. So we create these synthetic aquifers. We have two-dimensional tank, three-dimensional tanks. So we control the initial condition quite well. And then we can characterize the system because we design the heterogeneity in priori. We know all the information. Then finally, so it will give us some of these processes I mentioned in the land atmospheric processes, for example. It's important to understand the fundamental insight, get the fundamental insights to develop better conceptual models, and then you can validate the models. So the primary argument we use in our work is that it's almost impossible to validate a theory in the field, because you don't have the resolution of the data you need. You can calibrate model, you can fit things, but that doesn't mean you are validating these complex processes. So we have developed various tags. So this is a new facility. This is a fairly unique facility we built to look at this problem of these two systems coupling. The idea here is this is a climate control wind tunnel. We can control the climate. We can go to sub-freezing, and we can control the velocities, humidity, all these precipitation. And then we can in this section, this 8 meter long tank, doing a lot of dancing here. So this is an 8-meter long tank, and then the tank is coupled to a wind tunnel. So this is what you see inside the wind tunnel, the section 1 meter. These tanks are highly instrumental. These are a lot of automation, with a lot of sensors, soil moisture sensors, etc. So what this allows us to actually generate very, very accurate data. This is an example where we have a velocimetry systems. We can measure the velocity profiles quite accurately. So you could see that this particular case, we are looking at what is the effect of boundary layer on different soil types and soil moisture conditions. So if you look at, so this had the ability to get very highly accurate data, so we can validate, model that scale, because we can go to up to 8-meter length scale, so we can look at some of these scaling issues. So now this is a good example is that we are running some experiments now like this, looking at this, we have this hypothesis that the micro roughness, micro topography has an effect on these processes because there is a turbulent mixing here. And then we also can introduce vegetation. So we are running some experiments where we have vegetation, the subsurface, the heterogeneity, some of the flow. So whole idea is how do these systems behave effectively in the larger scale. So that's okay. So now, so that's a very fast introduction to things you could do. Some of the new problems, maybe some of the FEFLOW developers should look at, because I think if you look at these type of problems, where you're coupling the land to the atmospheric system, there are many opportunities for doing the type of solving some of the very critical problems which had to do with the climate change and energy development, etc. I just mentioned. So now I'm going to do is to spend the next 10 minutes on this FEFLOW integration. So what we did was that, so I'm going to talk about how to use FEFLOW in a real-time simulation. So the real-time data collection, I think, yes, it was mentioned in the first day of some of the work Mike Shee and FEFLOW are trying to do. So I'm going to talk about the proofs of concept. So this is normally what we do. We don't go and run experiments, large tanks all the time. We run in a smaller tank, try to understand. Then we go, we develop the algorithms, and I'm going to present some very preliminary results, some conclusion. Then I'm going to talk about a large tanks system we just in the process of testing now. So I'd like to thank for this part of the talk is primarily collaboration with Stanford School of Mines and Berkeley. We have a center called this $25 million center for 10 years to develop urban water infrastructure, actually. And I'd like to thank Pete and DHIVC for giving us the software, so we use this in our research quite effectively, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. So this is primarily based on 2 dissertations and actually 2 theses. One of my students at Colorado School of Mines who developed this algorithm, and then these are some of my collaborators at Stanford. This is a PhD student at Stanford, and some of you took the FEFLOW, one of the workshops. This student made a presentation of some of this work, and Peter Kitinadis is one of my collaborators at Stanford. So this is general idea. So the idea here is that so we like to use the subsurface aquifer, especially in arid zone in United States like California and parts of Colorado. So what we like to do is to see whether we could use the partially treated water, storm water, to store in the subsurface. So the idea here is to use the subsurface as for storage and treatment. So once the water is here, then the water get treated. So you have this infiltration bed, let the water infiltrate, and then you try to produce the water here. So how do I manage this system? So we'll see in a minute. The way we are going to do this is make it fully automated and couple with a model, so get the real-time data, we can do the operation. The complexities of this problem come from the fact that it's difficult to control. So you have a rainy day, you don't know to recharge. And then you don't know how long the water should stay in the system. And then you need to come out with how to recharge and recover system. And can we optimize this process? So you try to maintain a certain amount of water coming into the system and also maintain the quality of the water in the subsurface system. And then, as you know, this is in this particular case, we are looking at both the coupling of the unsaturated zone to the saturated zone. And then, as you know, the equations are highly nonlinear. And then the parameters are quite uncertain in this type of systems. And then also the important thing is that you are infiltrating from this side, and the time it takes for water to get out here, there's a time lag between the decision you make here and the decision you make here. So that's why the important about the model will tell you how these things are connected. So this is the general idea. So this was actually so I did some work with some computer scientists a number of years ago. We have published many papers on this idea of closed loop sensor networks. So the idea here is that this sort of cartoon based on a concept one of my students and we developed some years ago. So number of papers has appeared. I'm just putting one of the papers here. You see that once the plume is, this is the water you are infiltrating into the system, and this is the recharge plot. So the idea here is put this line of sensors, and the sensors get the information, and you get the data into a numerical model, and the numerical, and this is most complicated mouse I have seen. So then you go to the numerical model, you do the prediction, and then you make a decision based on the prediction you are making. So okay, so now if you look at so this is the first proof of concept setup we had developed. So this is a fairly small system, 1 meter long, and the reason for that is that actually when you run these large tank experiments, they are quite expensive. One experiment can take with the student time about $20,000. So we try to run these experiments in a smaller scale, and also this is sort of a philosophy in our research that you don't really design a tank to solve all the world's problems. We design the size of the tank to answer the question we are asking. So in this particular case, we want to demonstrate the methodology. So what you see here is that you see that this is a tank with an L shape. This is unsaturated zone. There's a recharge system here. This is simulating the recharge. And then there's a well pumping the water here. There are a whole bunch of sensors. There are different sensors. The soil moisture sensor. In this particular case, we don't have soil moisture. In the next one, we have the pressure sensors, temperature sensors, and water quality sensors. So we are basically putting a bromide solution into this one, and the sensors give the real-time data. So the whole idea is to see whether we can develop an algorithm to control this one and take the water out here. So this is some of the early experiment we did. So we fill with homogeneous and layered system. We are a simple heterogeneity because I think we, again, most of the work we do, there's uncertainty in the system, but from a packing point of view, it's a very certain system because we know exactly what is in the system. So we put these layers in the system, different type of test sands. These things are highly characterized. We know all the retention function characteristic, relative permeability, etc. So now, so this is general procedure. So we measure the water pressure, concentration, and again, I'm not going to say a lot of free flow simulations. The idea here, we set up the free flow model for this system here, and we actually, the parameters we are going to be looking at is hydraulic conductivity, porosity, and Vegetation parameters for the unsaturated zone. Again, I mentioned that this part of the tank is unsaturated, and we use the PEST inversion, and then we using the observed data on water pressure in this particular case. So the general algorithm is to use our continuously monitoring the behavior of the physical system. So we basically, the idea is that the sensor data comes continuously. And then we are, in this particular case, we are using wired sensors, but our idea is to use wireless sensor networks, and we have been using this in our work. And the data is fed into PEST, and then we try to see, we adjust the parameters in the PEST so that we get the best, so reduce the uncertainty of the parameters. And then the updated model, so this is all important. Now this has the third component of this model is that how do I optimize this system? So we basically use a generic algorithm to see how do I get the optimum operation, when to take the water out, when to put the water in. So this is the general idea. So I'm going to go through this fairly fast with about 5 minutes available to me. So this is a system operation, and then so here this is the data collection stage. So the sensors are continuously giving the data, and then actually I'm not going to talk about this part of the thing. What happens is that this is an interesting thing about this type of new paradigm in data collection using sensors. So when the system is generating data, initially you don't have a lot of information to any type of inversion. There are a lot of uncertainty. But as soon as more and more data comes, then the system becomes more accurate. So initially some of the data we are getting really bad, so we had to do some adjustments until the system sort of started functioning. So in this particular case, we are running for several days and sometimes months some of the experiments. So now So this box I'm not going to talk about, but I'm going to talk about these 3 boxes. So now, once you run the system operation, means all the data is stream into the system. We actually feed this into PEST, and then we will improve the model by the inversion, and then basically get that information. Now that information goes into the optimization simulation. And again, I'm just picking some data. There's a whole thesis on this thing just to show that after many of the simulation, we can match some of these things quite reasonably well, because as the data gets more and more, you see, like I said, the system improves and the uncertainty sort of goes down because we have more data now. So we can do the same thing with concentration data, and so you can again improve the model. Okay, so the generic algorithm is designed in, I mentioned this earlier, to maximize the amount of water infiltrated into the system. So the whole idea is that you want to get the maximum amount of water into the system, and also you can get the water out. But while you're doing that, you can constrain. You don't want to lower the water table too much. So we want to make sure that, so one of the constraints of the optimization problem is the water table. And then we also want to maintain a certain water quality in the system. And then the infiltration extraction cannot exceed a certain capacity because we have constraint on how much water into the system. So then the optimal control is, like I said, we use a generic algorithm. So the whole process keep going like this, except I don't show the other part of the data correction. So this is the optimization problem. You can formulate in whatever you want, and in this case, we are optimizing the water Q extension and infiltration. The idea is to get maximum water out, maximum stuff in. So this is the general way it operates. So we have the system operation period. This is the time the data gets collected. Then the data go to the PEST for inversion, transfer data, then general algorithm takes over and then optimize system, then go to the next control period. So you can keep going this, like I mentioned, the system learns as we go. That's the nice thing about this type of data. So now to summarize, so we demonstrate the proof of concept, and then we show how to integrate the software and hardware. And then some of the algorithmic issues we address, and then with the algorithm showed that we can significantly improve the control system. And then we also learned a lesson of many things about how to put the sensors into the system. Okay, now this is the large tank experiments, and this is actually, we are running this. They have many sensors in this one. This is, I'll give you the dimension in a minute. This is about 3 meters, 16 feet long. I don't know, I had to convert it into meters. And then it has all these sensors go to the wall, and the same system as we saw earlier, but it's more upscale system. So we can put, the reason we use this wood is that we can drill holes and put sensors wherever we want. So as you see here, these are the type of sensors we use. So we use pressure transducers, we use chemical sensors, we use temperature sensors. So these are all, there's a sensor network at each of these locations. This data comes in. So this is 16 feet long and 4 feet high. This is about 5 meters, I think. So you could see the system here. So this is actually running now. We have these things had to be run for a long time because we are looking at chemical processes. So in this particular case, we are simulating a hybrid system where we bring the field soils. So we bring the field soil and pack it so that basically most of the reactions happen here, and then these are the so we packed it to soil. So and then we so we get this data again. I'm just showing what type of things we get. So we can this continuous data. As you see, things can change. It's even this simple system. The pressure goes up and down. It can be do it. A lot has to do with how the sensors function. There are many issues. I didn't mention the data interruption. If you put this thing in the field, sometimes data is not good. So the algorithm should know what type of data. So we had data correction algorithms, etc. And then this is some, I actually removed, there's a movie, we were showing how the model, we put a tracer into the system to characterize and how tracer goes through, and then we can get the signals coming out of different locations. You can see this is the type of data you get. They're continuous data. This is quite different from the traditional data collection methods we use in graph sampling. So again, in this one, we use the observation versus comparison of data, and they do quite well under this control condition. Okay, so this is the last one slide I'm going to use to show that. So this is the vision we have for this type of research. Actually, we are trying to use this type of technologies for intelligent remediation. So we can actually put this sensor work, and this is a lot of interesting computer science issues involved, because you have these sensors in the system, and then you have this sensor network. Sometime when the plume start moving, nothing is happening here, so only these sensors, these are called wireless sensor network. They become subset of sensors. Most of sensors are sleeping, and when something happens, they wake up. And because that way, one of the issues of field implementation of this technology is that the battery power. So you want to maintain the battery power. So you don't want the sensors to sit there for and then generate data. And also that we have this what I call MAARs. Actually, we are actually proposing these ideas for leakage of CO2 in large systems. The nice thing about this type of systems is that you deploy large amount of sensors. They have to be very cheap. That's another problem we are dealing with. And then once the data comes in, and then we are doing some interesting research. If I have a signal here with the inversion to determine where the stuff is coming from, because a lot of time these deep formations in methane problem, in CO2 problem, you don't know where it is leaking. So again, this is based on some proof of concept we developed. So we have actually done so we have a synthetic aquifer for testing these type of systems. This is a 16 feet, 8 feet, I had to convert into meters. So this is the closed loop system. We had demonstrated that we can, what I was showing earlier was, so we had the 40 wells with sensors, so we can get the real-time data. This is a fully operational wireless sensor network system. Like I said, these are the type of data you get, and we have published some interesting papers on doing inversion in the Laplacian domain, so we can reduce the data, compress the data better. So. Okay, finally, I sort of talk about these conclusions. Again, we have validated validation of integrated model for emerging problems. Emerging problems had with the land atmospheric coupling. And then I believe multi-case testing of a very useful tool. And the real-time wireless sensor network provide new ways to monitor environmental systems. And we demonstrate the real-time data, the efficient simulation, inversion course can be coupled. And then I think further development is needed for apply this wireless sensor network. And finally, I want to thank, these are my research group. Thank you very much.